Hi everyone, welcome back to the 21 and Sensory podcast with me, Emily. On today's show, I have the lovely Alice. Alice is 25, autistic, and studying speech and language therapy at university. So, I've known Alice for quite a while now. We both knew each other growing up, and we were both late diagnosed as autistic, so this should be an interesting chat because we grew up not knowing each other as autistic, and now we both know each other as autistic. So yeah, it will definitely be an interesting one. So yeah, did you want to say hello, Alice?
Hi.
Thanks so much for coming on. So yeah, like I said, we both didn't know these things about ourselves, and obviously your diagnosis has been kind of more recent, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But I think let's start with your work and how you started your career after your first uni course, and you can kind of explain the process, the job roles and work experience you've had, and also the current course that you're on.
Yeah. So I guess going back a little bit, I became really interested in autism probably about the age of 13. It became quite a special interest. I was reading lots about it and watching kind of videos and documentaries. But I think autism is an interesting one because, I mean, relatively speaking, it wasn't that long ago that I was 13. But we've come so far in our understanding and the way it's talked about. The way that autism was presented was very restricted compared to now, and I definitely didn't see myself in it when I was reading about autism initially. And so then when I was 16, I started working at a play scheme for disabled children, which I loved. I learned so much. It really, really set me up for what I do now. It gave me a lot of confidence in working with people with a whole range of different needs. Um, but yeah, I guess I hadn't given a lot of thought into how it influenced my kind of understanding of autism until you mentioned it in your email. um,
Yeah.
I think the play scheme was for children with any disability, not just for autistic children, but there were lots of them who were autistic. And unlike a school where you're seeing the same children day in and day out, um, this play scheme catered for lots of different kids. And so you were meeting a massive range of people. And I think within the first few months working there, really, I realised that the autism spectrum was much more varied than I'd understood it to be. And I mean, that's not even including those who aren't diagnosed as children. Um, so yeah, I think I came into that job feeling, that having dived into the topic so much academically, that I knew quite a lot about autism, almost seeing myself as a bit of an expert. And I very quickly realised that that wasn't really the case, and it was much more worth my time getting to know the kids and learning from them all, and that they were all so different, which of course they would be. But when you've been reading things that say, children with autism do this and children with autism can't do that, you can have quite a set idea. And these kids were all so different in their personalities and also in just like their profiles of how their autism presents. So I think that definitely taught me a lot in that sense too. Yeah, and I loved that job. Continued that in the holidays, even once I'd gone to uni. And I think I worked there for 7 years in the end.
Oh wow! I didn't realise it was that long. I
Yeah,
know I knew it was a while.
I mean part time, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, a good 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a long time, my aim was to become a music therapist. So I learned about music therapy kind of around the same time as I'd learned about autism, and it also became a special interest. And I kind of decided pretty early on that that was what I wanted to do. And the general pathway to become a music therapist is that you do generally an undergraduate in music, and then you generally get a few years experience, and then you go and you do a master's in music therapy. And so that was the path I started going down. I did do an undergrad in music. I chose a course with lots of flexibility so that I could take modules like music and health and music education and do different placements and stuff like that. And then, my first job coming out of uni, my first full-time job was working in a school for children with severe learning disabilities and profound and multiple learning disabilities, which is SLD/PMLD. And I was actually doing kind of cover work and music teaching. Unfortunately, as you probably remember, it wasn't really the role for me, and I didn't really know yet how to support myself in the workplace. I guess I didn't really know what my strengths and limitations were or what I needed. I did love working with the kids, but I also really struggled with the job. And I actually only worked there for about 6 months because then COVID hit and we went into lockdown. And that was when I ended up working one-to-one with a boy at his home. And I spent most of that first lockdown period with him. And then the following academic year, I got a job working in an autism specialist school. So a lot of the kids there are kids who've started out in mainstream and, really struggled because the school system is not set up for neurodivergent children. I took a step back at that school for my welfare, and so didn't do music, worked as a classroom assistant instead, so that I had the evenings free to decompress and regulate rather than having to do more work outside of work in terms of planning, lesson planning and stuff. And actually I think that job really restored my confidence, because without blowing my own trumpet, is that the saying?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I did do the job quite well, and I was kind of praised and trusted and respected by my colleagues and the leadership, and so that was really positive. And I think it was kind of over those 2 years I became more interested in speech and language stuff, especially AAC. So for anyone who doesn't know, AAC is augmentative and alternative communication. And it's basically any different way of communicating other than speaking. So it could be Makaton, it could be a communication device, or a book, or things like that. And I became more interested in that side of things, and honestly fell out of love slightly with music therapy. I absolutely still think it's amazing and would definitely recommend it, but just it wasn't the right move for me for lots of different reasons. Which I guess was quite strange because it had been such a massive special interest for like 10 years. And also that kind of black and white thinking, I guess, in deciding at 13, like, this is what I'm going to do, and sticking with that. And actually, it's probably far more common that people don't still want to do the same thing at 23 as they did at 13. But that was quite a big shift for me. But at the same time, it was nice that I had found something that I did want to do instead. But so I stayed at that autism specialist school for nearly a year, and then I moved again. So I literally did 3 schools in 3 years. But I moved partly for logistical reasons, in that the third school was much closer than the second school had been travel-wise. But also I wanted to get a bit more experience in that SLD, PMLD area. I felt that I hadn't really been able to do that in that first job because I'd been so overwhelmed and had so much to focus on, so much to do. And so even though I did love my second school, I moved to a third school, again as a classroom assistant, and in a school for children with severe or profound and multiple learning disabilities. And I loved that too. And during that year, I applied for a master's in speech and language therapy, and I got in. It's a 2-year course, and I have just finished my first year, which feels absolutely crazy to say because I'm now like halfway through, which is insane. But I'm really enjoying it, and really excited about what's to come. Yeah.
Wow. I mean,
you are only 25 and it was your birthday yesterday, so happy birthday.
Thanks.
But you have already got like so much work experience and obviously like education to do with what you want to do in life. When do you think, kind of throughout your career so far, or even like studying, when was there an inkling that you might be autistic? I know obviously it was a special interest for you before you potentially linked it to yourself because of your career and, you know, needing to understand it more. Did it click at any point? Did someone say something at any point? Was there any kind of sort of process of becoming aware of it, sort of thing?
Yeah, so I don't think there was particularly a light bulb moment. I think it was more of a gradual process for me. So I think, as I say, when I first became very interested in autism, I wasn't seeing myself in it very much. And I think a part of that was the way that autism was presented then compared to now. I think it was a lot more restricted in the way it was talked about. And although I did have the odd moment of like, oh, I do that, or like, oh, that sounds like me. I think relating to like one or two autistic traits doesn't necessarily make you autistic. And yeah, I think I thought autism was this very specific set thing that I didn't really relate to. And so, yeah, very much thought I was learning about autism as a non-autistic person. I think another big part of that was that the kind of leading voices at the time were generally like professionals and parents. So there probably were advocates out there, but they weren't really what came up when you were looking for information, and they weren't really prioritized.
Yeah.
Autism was quite heavily medicalized and pathologized, and like it still sometimes is now, but then I feel like that was kind of the only dialogue. Like, don't get me wrong, being autistic in a neurotypical world can be hard, and lots of autistic people face a lot of difficulties, but I don't think it's a terrible disease that needs curing. I don't think autistic people need correcting to become more neurotypical, and that was very much kind of the message when I was first researching. So yeah, I think a big part of gaining a better understanding was kind of split between meeting people at work and then also hearing people sharing their experiences, I guess mostly online. I think another key part of it was changes in my own ability and capacity to mask and cope in those more difficult situations. And I think that kind of started happening, I guess, around sixth form. So I think growing up, I mean, looking back, there were definitely things that make more sense now with knowing that I'm autistic. But I was never really identified as someone who was massively different to my peers, maybe other than like the odd thing. And I guess a big factor in that was that I was heavily masking. I didn't know that I was doing that. I kind of assumed it was what everyone did, but I did. I watched everyone around me closely and did what they did. And I sometimes got that a bit wrong. Sometimes it felt like others had like met up beforehand and discussed what they were going to do and how they were going to act. And it was like I missed that and was having to catch up. But most of the time it kind of seemed like I was fitting in enough. I think another factor was, that for the most part, I actually really thrived in the school environment, which I know is not common for neurodivergent people, is not particularly made for us. And looking back, there were definitely challenges, but I did thrive off that routine and predictability and very clear expectations. I was quite academic. I mostly enjoyed learning, and yeah, just most of the time school felt kind of relatively safe. And I actually went to the sixth form attached to my school, so I stayed in the same place and was with a lot of the same people. And yet, at some point during the sixth form, it was like something switched and I quite suddenly couldn't cope anymore. My anxiety got really bad. I was having a lot of panic attacks. I had lower capacity for social environments and like sensory stuff, and just generally found things hard that I hadn't previously. And it was, I guess it was kind of weird because it came out of a bit out of nowhere and no one really knew what had happened, and I couldn't explain what had happened because I didn't really know why it had happened. And I think everyone kind of assumed that it was the pressure of sixth form with like a higher workload and exams and, you know, applying for uni. And I am totally not claiming that that wasn't stressful, but I don't think that was the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
And at times, I think actually having so much work to do gave me something to focus on and gave me an end goal. But yeah, I think kind of reflecting on it now, I think it was a bit like, for to use a very random analogy, it was like for a lot of my life I'd been on a treadmill,
Mm-hmm.
and at first that treadmill is quite slow and manageable, and as you get older that speed increases. I guess the treadmill is maybe being autistic in a neurotypical world, maybe also being undiagnosed and not knowing. As you get older, that can get more difficult. There are different expectations, like changing social dynamics and new environments, and I think masking starts to take like more of a toll. And it was like that treadmill was getting faster and faster, and at first that didn't matter too much because you're getting used to being on the treadmill and you're getting a bit stronger and a bit more confident. But ultimately, no matter how strong and confident you are on a treadmill, there comes a time when that speed is too high and you have been on it for too long and you get tired. And it was like that was what happened to me. So I don't know, like maybe it was kind of some of the small changes that came with sixth form in terms of having, I guess, like more free time and independent study, and like there being a bit of a shift in social groups, everyone kind of being a little bit older, a bit more grown up. Or it might have just been that I was just tired from coping and masking and trying to fit in for a little bit too long, and things just got too much. And just, yeah, to go back to the treadmill analogy, it was like I went flying off the back of the treadmill and crashing onto the ground. And my response for a long time was to try and keep getting back on at that same speed, you know, trying a bit harder, forcing that mask back on, trying to go back to how things were, and really kind of berating myself when that didn't work. And I think what was really key for me was realizing that I needed to make changes to my life and make adjustments in order to slow it down. And I think that took a while for me to realize. But I think just to go back to the question a little bit more, yeah, I think uni for the first time, the uni I went to for my undergrad gave me a bit more of a chance to do that. I think partly uni is just a fresh start. You've got, you know, new people, new environments, new routines. But also, and I don't know whether this is like a universal experience or whether it just happened to be the people that I was around, but I found that at uni, people were more open and accepting. And that is not a dig at all at my school friends because they were great, but it was the whole culture of school is like everybody is the same. And if you are different in any way, that's seen as a bad thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Whereas I felt like at uni, there was still an element of that, but there was more freedom to be a bit more yourself. And yeah, I think for a long time, so many aspects of my identity and my life had been dictated by how I felt I should be based on perceptions by other people. Based on my perceptions of other people. I think uni was the first time that I started actually properly considering, like, what do I like and what do I not like, and what am I interested in, like what do I find difficult and what helps me. and
like who you are.
yes,
kind of
like
thing.
just starting
Yeah.
to discover a lot more of like my sensory profile and special interests and stims, and how to just like regulate myself better day to day, and to make those changes. And I think it was kind of as I made those changes and found the things that helped me, it became a bit more like, okay, maybe I might be autistic, because, you know, it really helps me to have a routine. Like, it really helps me to use sensory aids. I'm actually realizing that a lot of the time it is too much noise going on that means that I struggle with that place or whatever it is, you know, like just kind of starting to come to realize. But I think it was quite an up and down process, and I think probably quite a few people can relate to that, like days of, oh my gosh, I am so autistic, and then days of like, oh no, I'm not autistic because I don't do X, Y, and Z, and like everything in between that. I think a really important thing for anyone who is considering whether they might be neurodivergent in some way is that you don't have to relate to everything every person of that neurotype says or does. And so realizing that was quite important for me too, because I spent a lot of the time questioning whether I could really be autistic when I didn't do certain things that other autistic people did or said. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, and that it kind of, you know, things can fluctuate. Like you were saying, like you might one day think like, oh, you know, this was a good day, like I didn't really feel.
Yeah.
But then the imposter syndrome and stuff like that. So I do understand that. That does make sense.
I think ultimately what made it a lot more certain for me was that first year working full time and finding it so challenging, which I guess maybe is a positive thing that came out of a more tricky time. It just became really like evident to me that I did need to make those changes and accommodations in order for things to work for me, and that I did experience things differently, and that I wasn't just making it up. And so yeah, it was kind of in that first year working that I did decide on like asking to be referred for an assessment and that kind of thing. But then even that, you know, led to a lot of looking back at previous experiences and like introspection. I think that's a word.
Yeah.
Like figuring myself out as I was kind of collating information for, I guess, first for my referral and then later on for an autism assessment.
Like a history project on yourself.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, kind of, looking back at things in the new light and going, yeah, that could be because of this. And I think at the same time, you know, over the last few years, there's been more and more people sharing their experiences, again, largely online. And so there were more things that I could relate to. Yeah, so I think that was kind of the gradual process of going from like, I am a non-autistic person reading about this thing called autism, to being like, yeah, I am 100% autistic.
Yeah. I get that is quite a leap, but it sounds like, and I know you've done your research and you've done that like background, like trawling through stuff, and like you said, like when you first looked into it, or when you first, you know, started kind of working, that sort of like resource and information, it just wasn't out there.
No.
Or it was really like American, or it was really toddler based, which, you know, is fine, but not great if you're like a teen or an adult looking for stuff on autism.
Yeah.
So let's discuss the process of getting diagnosed, because I know it, and it wasn't. It was a lot. I feel it was.
That's one way to put it.
Had to jump through a lot of hoops. Let's put it that way. So maybe, yeah. Do you want to explain? Kind of, you've explained the lead up really well. So how was the actual process of getting referred?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people, that first hurdle is the GP. I was actually really lucky with my GP, so he didn't put up much resistance to that. I think part of that might have been that because we were in COVID times, it was all on an online service, which meant I could compose a nicely written message with a summary of like why I thought I was autistic and why I wanted an assessment. And then I also attached a document with more detail on that. I don't know which bits he read, whether he even opened that document, but he said that he would refer me. But then, yeah, I was sent the AQ10, which is the autism quotient, the version with 10 questions. And they give like statements, and then you have to put definitely agree, slightly disagree, and definitely disagree.
I can remember one of the questions that you said was on it.
Yeah. I think I found that really hard, and I think I overthought quite a lot of it. I don't even know actually what they use it for, whether it is like a screening thing or whether they just look at it in your appointment when that comes around. But I just was very in my head of like, oh my gosh, they're judging whether I'm autistic off these 10 questions. I have to get them right, otherwise they're going to, say that I'm not, or like not give me an assessment. But then also wanted to be honest on them. I didn't want to just put like what I thought would get them to put me to the next stage.
You.
Yeah, like I don't know what I mean. So I think I overthought that quite a lot. I seem to remember I messaged you like, what does this mean? Like, help me. So I did that, and then the GP contacted me to say that he had referred me, but I didn't get any kind of confirmation. I expected to get like a letter or something to say that I was on the wait list, and I didn't get anything, like not even a text message. And so I actually, after a little while, emailed the assessment service myself and just asked for confirmation that I had definitely been referred and that I was on the wait list. And they said that I was. And so then I asked for a rough time frame, and they said it will likely be around 18 months to 2 years, which, is a long time, but it was kind of what I was expecting based on what I had heard other people had waited.
And when was this? What year was?
Oh gosh, 2020.
Yeah,
I want to say. I might be wrong about that, but I think it was 2020. And yeah, so I kind of waited that time frame that I'd expected, and even that was quite agonizing of being like, when's the appointment going to come? And then after that 2 years, I asked for an update, and they said, in summary, basically that the waiting list was long and that they had staff shortages, and that it was likely to be around another 4 years, which,
on top of the 2 years,
would have made that a 6-year wait in total. And at that point, I very much reconsidered my options. So there is a thing you can do on the NHS called Right to Choose. And if I'd known about that initially, I would have done that, and that would have probably been a shorter wait. But by this point, even the lists for that were still long, was longer than I would have wanted to wait, having already waited the 2 years.
So the list for the service that is recommended when the waiting list for the original service was also too long.
Yeah, the Right to Choose lists. Because, there's only, I think, 2 Right to Choose providers who do autism assessments, whereas there are more for ADHD assessments, I think.
Right. Okay.
And so they're just like everywhere in demand. And so, I did start to consider private and was kind of looking into the options there. And when I mentioned this to my parents, they then came to me and said that they would like to pay for me to have a private assessment, which I am so super grateful for. I know that is not an option for so many people, and I was very, very lucky that they offered that. So my assessor was actually recommended to me on a Discord group run by the YouTuber Purple Ella, who I know you've had on your podcast. And yeah, that was really nice that I was able to choose a company who were very informed about neurodivergence and late diagnosis. And like, I knew I wasn't going to be faced with some, professor with very outdated views or anything like that, because I've
Yeah.
heard the horror stories from other people. Yeah. So then I had a little bit of a wait for it, but not nearly as bad. It was like a couple of months. And then, my assessment was online, which I was actually a bit worried about because I didn't know whether they would be able to assess me as well virtually. And I was
Yeah.
also aware that I can tend to mask more over that kind of platform. But it was actually fine. And in many ways, it was really nice being able to do it in my own space and not to have to worry about like traveling and what to take with me and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
As far as I remember, I think the assessment took about 5 hours with the addition of breaks.
And it was all on one day, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You didn't have like a
Yes,
split.
it
Yeah.
was all in one day with like a couple of breaks and a lunch break. And then part of that time included them talking with my mum and asking her questions, but I was able to be present for that too, which was really nice. And then the best bit of the whole experience was that she was able to give me the diagnosis straight away at the end of the assessment, which was such a relief because I had heard of people having to wait weeks or months after their assessment to find out the outcome, which would have been such a huge anxiety trigger. Whereas
Yeah.
she literally started talking me through the findings, noticed that I was anxious and wanting to know, and was like, "Oh, I'll tell you now. My outcome is that you're autistic," and then like went through the rest of her notes.
You're like, just start with that bit.
Yeah, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I need to tell you now because you're about to explode." Yeah, and then I received a report with kind of everything she'd talked me through about 6 weeks after my assessment, and she actually sent me through like a draft version first to check that I was happy with everything she had included on there, which again was really nice to be involved with that. And then I had my diagnosis.
Nice. And so you were between university then, or were you still? I'm trying to remember. You hadn't started your masters
Yeah, it was at the start. It was at the start of uni,
at the start of the second.
of the second uni.
Yeah. Okay. I'm like, the undergraduate? No, because that was before. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how has that diagnosis helped you both, yourself, but also within kind of your master's course as well? Like, has it kind of helped in terms of like accommodations and things like that?
I think in terms of myself, I mean, learning that I was autistic was really helpful, and then receiving the official diagnosis. By that point, I was pretty sure, but it just kind of got rid of those little niggles of imposter syndrome that were like, "You're making it all up."
Yeah.
It was like, no, someone else does think it too. You're not making it up. So that was helpful in that sense. In terms of uni accommodations, so we have like a disability advisory service who I did contact, and they, from what from what I hear, it very much varies depending on who you get. So there's a lot of kind of negative comments about them. My person's been really helpful, and
Okay.
so I don't want to say, "Oh yeah, they're fantastic," because I know that that's not the experience for lots of people.
Right.
But yeah, my advisor was helpful in kind of discussing what accommodations I might need. To be honest, I didn't need a huge amount in terms of lectures and stuff because I kind of manage that myself. Like if I need to go for a little break, I'll just go for a little break. It's not like school where you have to ask.
Yeah.
And I record all my lectures and stuff, but there's kind of permission to do that anyway. For me, the biggest thing was placements, was wanting to get placement support well, no, not even necessarily support, but just for it to be there if I needed it. You know, if I was finding a placement difficult, to have the option to be like, well, we've discussed that these are my needs and like the things that I find difficult. So, yeah. So she was really helpful in kind of advising what to say to that. I think response from the staff in the department has been mixed, and I've not always had the most understanding response from staff in the faculty.
Which is a bit worrying considering the kind of subject.
Yeah, so there's a lot of kind of rules around like professionalism and standards of proficiency, which aren't necessarily written in a way that is particularly neurodivergent friendly. And so rather than trying to accommodate like, right, how can we make sure that you're meeting those standards while also it working for you and not burning yourself out, that I haven't really had that response. It's been more like, no, you need to be able to do that because X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Which, to be honest, hasn't been too much of an issue because my placements have been good and my placement educators have been really helpful and supportive, and so I haven't needed to fall back on that. But I think had I needed to fall back on that, there might have been resistance and that might have been more difficult. Yeah.
Some universities do it really well, but you don't want it to be kind of, you know, hit and miss. And the fact that you were like, you know, I don't want to say that it was great because you know of other people, even at your own university, who haven't had that good experiences is kind of worrying.
I don't think things are, well, I think in one sense things are very standardized in that you kind of get a set list of, would these things help you? And some of them are, you know, like borderline hilarious. It's like they've just looked up what is autism online and you know, not actually talked to any autistic people. But then from the other sense, it seems like things aren't particularly standardized in that it very much seems to depend on who you get and who you're communicating with, you know, with what the rules are and that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know what the solution to that is really, but yes, that has kind of been my experience.
And I wanted to kind of ask you as well, because I know that you decided to do kind of something a little bit more public in that you decided to tell people on social media about your diagnosis. Was that scary? Is my main question, because you're talking to someone who is very anonymous online. So I'd be keen to understand how scary it was and the kind of reaction as well.
Yeah, so I think I had told a few people over the years that I was waiting for an assessment. And then when I had my diagnosis, I kind of told the people who I'd spoken to quite a bit previously about it. So like you and a few other friends and my family. But with other people, it felt a bit weird to just kind of contact them and be like, oh, by the way, I'm autistic. With newer people, I think it was kind of easier to introduce that because they hadn't known me before. So like I made a decision really early on that I wanted to tell people on my course, because I knew that autism would likely be coming up as a topic, and I didn't want that to feel awkward. And also I wanted to be able to try and unmask a bit and to be able to be, like, I guess, a bit more open about the things that I did find difficult. But then, yeah, there were other people in my, like, who were kind of like in my life, but I hadn't spoken to recently, or where it just felt a bit awkward. Who were like, I guess, yeah, I didn't know how to just randomly tell them. But then I was also aware that I did want to be able to talk about it more openly without worrying about who I'd told and having to like remember who I had and who I hadn't told. And I also knew that people sharing their diagnoses with me really helped me to feel more confident. And And so, yeah, I think I often do a bit of a reflective post around the new year. And so I just did a Facebook post, and I think an Instagram post as well, highlighting a couple of the big things that had happened that year, like starting my course. And then, like, I also just shared, hey, I got my autism diagnosis, which is pretty cool. And yeah, I think, I do have, a fair amount of people on my social media that, people from previous jobs, people from previous unis, a few people still from school and that kind of thing. But, I don't have anyone on there that I don't know, I guess, or I don't know as well. So it's not like I'm kind of coming out to the world, as
Yeah.
it was to people who know me. But yeah, I was nervous because I think partly because I didn't know how people would react, but also partly because I didn't know whether it was a bit of a weird thing to post on social media, like whether people would be like, okay, why is she posting that? But no, I mean, I got a lovely response from it. I got quite a few kind of comments from people, and a couple of messages and things. And obviously, I don't know what everyone's feelings were about it. For all I know, there may have been people who reacted negatively and didn't decide to tell me. But no, from the people who did speak to me, it was a positive response.
Well, that's good. And I think, like you say, it is quite nice to be authentic and be yourself in real life, but also online. And the fact that you were like, do you know what? I think it would just be almost simpler to just be like, I am this, and this is me, kind of thing, going forward.
Yeah, I think as part of kind of my work and the areas and I'm interested in and that kind of thing, I do often share little articles or kind of petitions and things like that on my social media. To be honest, with Facebook, it's pretty much all I use it for now. But so I felt like if I needed to, I wanted to be able to say, something about being autistic in that context, and not have to be like, autistic people who I know, like,
yeah, you can actually be
this.
Like, my experience.
Yeah. Which I don't know that I have done that, but just in general, I want to be able to participate in conversations about autism and neurodivergence, and it not be a kind of awkward thing of, am I talking about me, or like,
yeah. And I kind of feel as well, like, I remember you chatting with me about kind of, like you said, being part of like Purple Ella's Discord and stuff like that. And I feel like you were quite an active kind of member of the autism community before, because obviously, you were studying within kind of, education and like looking at like different therapies and things like that. So do you think that kind of benefited you, both like pre and post diagnosis, already kind of being a little bit involved in those communities?
Yeah, I think so. I've followed many autism like advocates or creators or whatever the right word for them is for a while on things like Instagram and YouTube, and that was really helpful in kind of putting into words things that I perhaps couldn't quite pinpoint when I was going through that pre-diagnosis, figuring things out. But also just nice when people share things and you're like, oh, I'm not the only one who does that. And then I did join a couple of Facebook groups. But to be honest, I didn't post on them much because they're always quite big groups, and it just felt kind of vulnerable. But it was interesting to see other people's posts and comments. I think I kind of participated more passively by just like reading other people, what they posted. But yeah, one group that was really helpful for me has been the Discord group that I mentioned earlier, run by Purple Ella. When I joined, it was pretty small. It has grown since, and I think when I checked the other day, there are about 75 members on there now.
Wow, okay.
But it's still smaller than most of the kind of Facebook networks and things like that. And it is a really nice space to be able to talk about things, both autism related, life related, and just random stuff. so like the nice thing about a Discord group, because I was not familiar with Discord before joining this particular group, is that there are different channels, I think they're called, depending on what you're talking about. So like in Ella's one, there's a channel for just general chat. There's more sensitive topics. There's one for sharing joyful things. This one doesn't apply to me, but there's one about parenting. And so you can kind of choose which topics you're engaging with at which times. So it's not too overwhelming, and it's also moderated, so it feels like a very safe space. And I guess
you know where to post as well, which is always helpful.
Well, most of the time. Sometimes I post like, I don't know if this is where I'm supposed to be posting this, but I'm posting it here. And definitely pre-diagnosis, when doing all that digging, it was great to be able to post things and be like, do other people experience this? And to see that, and also to ask for advice with things like getting a recommendation for a private assessor and things like that. I think I post less of that kind of stuff on there now, and I do tend to just engage in more of the kind of general conversation about things. But yeah, definitely it was really, really helpful at the time.
And I guess it's always going to be there should you have a question, or even just interacting with someone else and being like, yes, I struggle with that too.
Yeah, and actually the thing that I have used it for more recently is when a topic has come up at uni where I've thought, oh, I'm not quite sure how I feel about that, or like, I don't think I experience it like that. I'm always very aware that I'm only one autistic person, and I don't want to just go in there and be like, that's wrong, because that's not what I think. So being able to share things on there and be like, what do people think of this? Is this okay? Or like, is this accurate? And get either people saying, oh, actually, my experience is different to yours, or people agreeing with me, and then being able to kind of formulate a conclusion based on that has also been really helpful.
And I know, like you've also said, like at university there's been some questionable lectures or lecturers on the topic of autism, so I guess getting a more general feedback, it could be quite helpful.
I think kind of potentially an important note is that actually I've been quite impressed with the speech and language therapy teaching. I think they are quite neurodivergent informed, but we've also taken psychology modules, and those are the ones that I found are still very set in the medical model, and very like, I don't know, just
outdated,
questionable. Yes. And then we also had a medical lecture by a pediatrician, and that was very questionable, but she was an external lecturer, so she wasn't someone who works at the uni, and I did feed that back, and the lecturers who I fed that back to did agree with me. So I think in terms of the actual department I'm part of, it's not been bad at all. But
but good that you can kind of sort of advocate and be like, do you know what, that's not sitting right in terms of what your experience is and what you've heard of other people's experience. So it's good that you are able to kind of feedback and be like, this isn't,
I think I try not to do that too much, because I don't want to just be like constantly arguing with every little thing, and I make sure that it's something that I actually like, that I think is actually really important. So like with this medical lecture, for example, she was advising a room full of potential future speech and language therapists on practices that I believe would have been harmful. So things like forcing eye contact. And I thought, ultimately, this could lead to these people in the future going and doing that to a autistic child or adult who can't, who aren't in the power position to then say, well, actually, that I don't want to do that. So then, for example, it was really important for me to say, actually, I don't think that's right. I didn't say that to the lecturer, because I wasn't able to kind of put my thoughts together in time, but I sent a message through to my cohort at a later point, and kind of expressed my feelings on the lecture. But yeah, I try not to do that often because I think I just annoy everyone.
But I think it is important that you share like your lived experience and be like, do you know what, actually this could be quite harmful, just so you're aware.
Yeah.
Like even just you messaging the rest of your cohort, you know, just so that they have almost the other side
Yeah.
of the story.
And I think that's how I try to frame it. It's not like I know best, this is wrong. It's just like there is another side to this, and sometimes, again, especially with psychology teaching, it can be just very like, these are the leading theories that were formulated 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And not actually, okay, but this is what autistic people nowadays are saying. But no, I think we've had some great teaching on kind of neurodivergence and the social model and things like that. And so it hasn't all been bad.
Well, that's good to hear. And so I know we've kind of mentioned that really autism's kind of been a kind of running special interest throughout your life before you knew you were autistic. Do you have any other special interests that you would kind of say that you're into, or anything that you kind of enjoy as like a hobby and things like that? I know you're quite musical and you're from a musical family, so yeah.
I think so. In terms of special interests, another big special interest of mine at the moment is AAC, which I said earlier, so alternative communication, kind of looking into the different ways that people can be supported to communicate. As part of that, I'm learning Makaton, which is a system of signs and symbols, but I'm mainly focused on the signs at the moment, which are used to help people to communicate, either express themselves and or understand what others are saying. So I'm really enjoying learning that. And yeah, I think other special interests that I've kind of had that are a little bit more on the down low at the moment, but I still really enjoy them, and they may well come back in strength again at some point, is the musical Hamilton and Lin-Manuel Miranda's writing of that, kind of how it's all put together. What else do I like? I really I really like learning about what paramedics do and like ambulance documentaries and stuff, which I realise is a really random one.
No, you're talking to someone who loves policing.
There we go. I think
policing
in a life where I maybe wasn't autistic and could handle long shifts and high intensity work, I would want to be a paramedic, but I don't think that would do good things at the moment for my mental well-being. And then in terms of, I guess, hobbies, like you say, music. I love listening to music, especially film soundtracks and musicals. And I also play clarinet, saxophone, a bit of piano, and I have a guitar and a ukulele, but I don't play them a huge amount. In fact, my guitar isn't even with me at the moment. It's still at my parents' house. And I really enjoy playing in groups. So I'm a member of the concert band and the choir at the uni, which obviously aren't meeting at the moment because it's outside of term time, but during term we meet, and that's really good fun. I like swimming. I like doing jigsaw puzzles. Nice. I like reading. I think that's...
Are you still going to your local swimming pool? Because I know that you'd kind of started to do that a bit.
I love swimming. It is... I'm often a bit like... Because with the local swimming pool, like, you have to go at specific times. And it's a bit of effort. Like, you have to get there at the right time. And then, like, afterwards, you have to, like, get yourself slightly soggy back into your clothes and all that kind of thing. Like, I have a love-hate relationship with going swimming, but the actual swimming part of it I really love. And actually I think it's really good for me, like, sensory wise. I think it gives me a lot of positive sensory input, and also in terms of like the mobility side of things, like, I'm super non-flexible, I don't know if that's the word, but I'm very bad anything like that, and have had some issues with kind of tight calf muscles and the muscles in my neck and shoulders and stuff, where I've had physio. And I think swimming is a really good way for me to kind of stretch that all out. And I always leave feeling like, yeah, all nice and stretched. So I'm doing actions here, but of course you can't see them. I'm
just imagine.
I'm doing lots of stretching. Yeah, as I'm talking to you. Yeah, once I get past the slightly sticky changing rooms, I really enjoy swimming. Yeah.
I feel like it's also like recommended a lot by like physios or like
Yes.
after surgeries and stuff as a good, like, gentle but actually quite a hard workout all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a very slow swimmer, so I'm not going and doing like high speed, I don't know, butterfly or whatever, but
you're not doing turns at the end of each.
No, I don't know how people do them. I can't make
how
that out.
I know.
But yeah, it's just, I just find it really kind of just stretches me out, and makes me feel more relaxed, I guess.
That's good. That's always a good thing. The last thing I was going to ask you is, obviously you're halfway through your masters.
I am.
And what's the temptation to be like, what's your 5-year plan? But I'm not going to ask that question. Horrible question.
I don't have a 5-year plan.
Does anyone? I don't know. But kind of to explain to people, how does it work in terms of, are you a speech and language therapist when you finish that? Do you have to go into school and do almost like a newly qualified year? Like how does it work for therapists?
Yeah, kind of, yeah, both of that. Like, I think from what I understand, at the end of next year, I get my kind of qualification, and you get registered with the HCPC, which I can't actually remember what it stands for, so that's not very helpful. And yeah, but then you have a year where you're kind of like a little bit more supervised, and you have kind of competencies that you have to prove and do some work for, and that kind of thing. And
okay.
Yeah, and so it's sort of like an NQT year as a teacher.
So you're not just kind of like left to it, you've got like a bit of guidance. That sounds good. Exciting. And I think that was everything. We've just come in at just under an hour. That was
amazing.
Impressive.
I was so worried I was going to talk for like 10 hours bore everyone.
I think what I will do is just kind of pop in some links to some of the stuff you talked about, like the kind of right to choose stuff.
Yes.
Maybe, I can't remember what else. Maybe the Purple Ella Discord, just any other kind of people you mentioned as well.
Yes.
I'll pop them in. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
That's
and
okay.
Maybe we'll have to do like a catch-up episode with you and be like, Alice, where is she now?
as a qualified, hopefully.
You'll be like,
any luck?
I have this many students and I'm doing this. Like, that would be interesting. Hopefully we'll catch up with you in the future.
Thank you for having me.